go into detail on all those. Full reusability is really the super hard one. It's very difficult to achieve reusability for even an orbital system, and that challenge becomes even substantially greater for a system that has to go to another planet. But as an example of the difference between reusability and expandability in aircraft, and this you could actually use any form of transport. You could say a car, bicycle, horse. If they were single use, almost no one would use them. It would be too expensive. But with frequent flights, you can take something like an aircraft that costs $90 million, and if it was single use, you'd have to pay $500,000 per flight. But you can actually buy a ticket on Southwest right now from LA to Vegas for $43, including taxes. So that's a massive improvement. Right there, it's showing a 4 order of magnitude improvement. Now this is harder. The reusability doesn't apply quite as much to Mars because the number of times that you can reuse the spaceship the spaceship part of the system is less often because the Earth-Mars rendezvous only occurs every 26 months. So you get to use the spaceship part roughly every 2 years. Now you get to use the booster and the tanker as frequently as you'd like. And so that's why it really makes a lot of sense to load the spaceship into orbit with essentially tanks dry and have it have really quite big tanks that you then use the booster and tanker to refill while it's in orbit and maximize the payload of the spaceship so that when it goes to Mars, you really have a very large payload capability. So, as I said, refilling in orbit is one of the essential elements of this. Without refilling in orbit, you would have a half order of magnitude impact roughly on the cost. By half order of magnitude, I think the audience mostly knows, but what that means is each order of magnitude is a factor of 10. So not refilling in orbit would mean a 500% roughly increase in the cost per ticket. It also allows us to build a smaller vehicle and lower the development cost, although this vehicle is quite big, but it would be much harder to build something that's 5 to 10 times the size. It also reduces the sensitivity of performance characteristics of the booster, rocket, and tanker. So if there's a shortfall in the performance of any of the elements, you can actually make up for it by having 1 or 2 extra refilling trips to the spaceship. So it's very important for reducing the susceptibility of the system to a performance shortfall. And then producing propellant on Mars is actually also very obviously important. Again, if we didn't do this, it would have at least a half order of magnitude increase in the cost of a trip, so a 500% increase in the cost of the trip. And it would be pretty absurd to try to build a city on Mars if your spaceships just kept staying on Mars and not going back to Earth. You have this massive graveyard of ships. You have to do something with them. So it really wouldn't make sense to leave your spaceships on Mars. You really want to build a propellant plant on Mars and send the ships back. So, and Mars happens to work out well for that because it has a CO2 atmosphere, it's got water ice in the soil, and with H2O and CO2 you can produce CH4, methane, and oxygen O2. So picking the right propellant is also important. Think of this as maybe there's 3 main choices, and they have their merits, but kerosene or rocket propellant grade kerosene, which is also what jets use. Rockets use a very expensive form, a highly refined form of jet fuel essentially, which is a form of kerosene. It helps keep the vehicle size small, but because it's a very specialized form of jet fuel, it's quite expensive. The reusability potential is lower. Very difficult to make this on Mars because there's no oil. So really quite difficult to make the propellant on Mars. and then propellant transfers is pretty good, but not great. Hydrogen, although it has a high specific impulse, is very expensive, incredibly difficult to keep from boiling off, because liquid hydrogen is very close to absolute zero as a liquid. So the insulation required is tremendous, and the cost of the energy cost on Mars of producing and storing hydrogen is very high. So when we looked at the overall system optimization, it was clear to us that that methane actually was the clear winner. So it would require maybe anywhere from 50 to 60% of the energy on Mars to refill propellant using the propellant depot, and just the technical challenges are a lot easier. So we think methane's actually better on just really almost across the board. And we started off initially thinking that hydrogen would make sense, but ultimately came to the conclusion that the best way to optimize the cost per unit mass to Mars and back is to use an all-methane system, or technically deep cryomethalogs. So those are the four elements that need to be achieved. Whatever architecture, whatever system is designed, whether by SpaceX or anyone, we think these are the four features that need to be addressed in order for the system to really achieve a low cost per ton to the surface of Mars. And this is a simulation of the overall system. So what you saw there is really quite close to what we will actually build. It will look almost exactly what you saw, like what you saw. So this is not an artist's impression. These, the simulation was actually made from the SpaceX engineering CAD models. So this is not, it's not just, well, this is what it might look like. This is what we plan to try to make it look like. So in the video, you got a sense for what the system architecture looks like. The rocket booster and the spaceship take off, loads the spaceship into orbit. The rocket booster then comes back. It comes back quite quickly, within about 20 minutes. And so it can actually launch the tanker version of the spacecraft, which is essentially the same as the spaceship, but filling up the unpressurized and pressurized cargo areas with propellant tanks. So they look almost identical. So this also helps lower the development cost, which obviously will not be small. And then the propellant tanker goes up, and it'll go up multiple times, so anywhere from 3 to 5 times to fill the tanks of the spaceship in orbit. And then once the tanks are full, the cargo has been transferred, and we reach the Mars rendezvous timing, which, as mentioned, is roughly every 26 months. That's when the ship would depart. Now, over time, there would be many spaceships. You would ultimately have, I think, upwards of 1,000 or more spaceships waiting in orbit. And so that the Mars colonial fleet would depart en masse. They're kind of like Battlestar Galactica. You've seen that thing. That's a good show. So a bit like that. But it actually makes sense to load the spaceships into orbit because you've got 2 years to do so, and then make frequent use of the booster and the tanker to get really heavy reuse out of those. And then with the spaceship, you get less reuse because you have to say, well, how long is it going to last? Well, maybe 30 years. So that might be 12 to maybe 15 flights of the spaceship at most. So you really want to maximize the cargo of the spaceship and reuse the booster and the tanker a lot. So anyways, the ship goes to Mars, gets propellant replenished, and then returns to Earth. So I'll go into some of the details of the vehicle design and performance. And I'm going to gloss over, I'll only talk a little bit about the technical details in the actual presentation, and then I'll leave the detailed technical questions to the Q&A that follows. This is to give you a sense of size. It's quite big. And